Welcome back to That Rugby podcast, hosted by the Rugby Booth. Husey, we said last week we were going to come to this podcast as two happy men. And I think quite the opposite has happened to us over the weekend.
I was happy for about 30 minutes, and then I was crushed.
Yeah, I was happy for about 50 minutes, and then I was also well into the deep end of the water,
Yeah.
I'd say.
Yeah, it's a good thing the game was on early Sunday morning. Otherwise, I would have gotten drunk. It was just oh man, it was tough viewing. I tell you what, it is maddening. I mean, let's talk about the game. So, for 30 minutes, the Wallabies looked extremely competent. Looked like they had some decent shape in their attack. They're finally getting some good ball out of their 10. Ben Donaldson didn't look uncomfortable. They were scoring. Angus Bell was running like the Hulk, just shrugging people off left and right. Telelo Tupo had exceptional ball playing skills. We know he does, but just was showcasing that part of his game again. And Kellaway and Yorkerson combined for an amazing try. It looked like everything we thought about the Wallabies, what they could be, it happened in the first 30 minutes. The remaining 50 minutes, the Wallabies showed us who they used to be and who they still are to some extent, right? The thing I'll say about a lot of that, there's some dodgy calls and whatnot, but it's definitely not refereeing. It was at times, and this is what really gets me, was lack of effort. A couple of those tries were just severe lack of effort from the half of the players. And I don't know what that is, if it's exhaustion from the time zones or they should have adjusted by. I just don't know. But I know that Joe Schmidt will be tearing some of those players a new one, especially Tate McDermott, who on one of the tries was just casually jogging back while Argentina was on the attack. If he'd run back and gotten into the defensive line covered fullback, which he could have easily done with his pace and been there quite comfortably for a few seconds, which he should have done, then perhaps he could have stopped the try. And that, I think, is what is going to piss Schmidt off the most. And that, I think, could be a knock against McDermott, that he may not see, the field again as a player for the Wallabies in this Rugby Championship series. It is those kinds of plays are it's just unacceptable. You can't have that lack of effort. The worst scoreline against a Wallabies team in history. There's no other way to put it. So I think I think there's some players that did some good in that game. I mentioned Bell and Tupou. Nick Frost had a decent game as well. I thought in the opening 30, the operation was running pretty smoothly. Donaldson looked comfortable. He had great goal kicking accuracy, which is something that Lolesio has lacked. So I think those two should have this sort of continual development put into them as the 2 10s for the Wallabies. Whether it's Lolesio starting and Donaldson finishing, or the other way around. I would actually say I'd probably prefer Donaldson starting and Lolesio finishing, because Donaldson can get those kicks throughout the game. It's tough to say, because you want your more reliable kicker on, I guess, when the game's on the line. But to even put you into a position where the game's on the line, you need a reliable kicker. In the game against South Africa, the second test, if we had Donaldson with his kicking ability, we would have been up at halftime, and who knows what could have happened after that. Although we had those hand injuries and stuff as well. Look, it is really disappointing, but this is a team in the rebuild. The only people I have seen be negative about this game, supremely negative, has been rugby league fans, which they're always looking for an excuse to put the boot in. It's about the 17th time I've said this is the final nail in the coffin of Australian rugby. And by now this coffin is more nails than wood. But New Zealand fans, South African fans, Argentinian fans, everyone's like, it's a rebuild. It's going to happen, but there were positives to take out of that game. And I think that overall, there are positives to take out of it, and you have to look at it like that. But the errors that come from lack of effort have to be ruthlessly stamped out. That is unacceptable to rugby fans. I'm sure it's unacceptable to the coaching staff. And the players need to learn that it needs to be unacceptable to their standards as well. And they can't play like that.
Yeah, and talking about unacceptable, I think that last 10 minutes is when you really pinpoint it, it should be like a, what was it, like 41-17, 41-24 loss. Like,
Yeah.
that last 10 minutes to concede 20 plus points in a 10-minute span is unacceptable in international rugby for any team, let alone the Wallabies. So I sit there and I go, even, you can discuss 17 minutes, you say the game ended after 70 minutes, you still would have lost the test, but that was a performance like you could take quite a lot away from it where you went, look, we started strong, what happened here, so on and so forth. That last 10 minutes, I had to watch it back because I didn't watch it live. It's just a calamity. Like, I just couldn't believe just the ease that Argentina ripped through. And I go, does it? I mean, it must frighten you because watching it back again, I go, Tupou off at 35, Bell off at 40. All of a sudden, second half performance becomes a second half performance. And by no means was Jake Gordon at his best. But again, as you said, Tate McDermott comes on and these things don't. And then I just go, that last 10 minutes, it'll be interesting what Smith takes away from this as well, because he's made those changes quite early. As he go back now and go, okay, we can't do what the Springboks do because our players run out of gas. Like, even, like, you look at that second
Slipper
half.
and Alatoa are older props now. Slipper's just become tied the most capped Wallaby in history, which is an incredible achievement and speaks to his quality as a player. But you have to recognise he's an older prop now. He's not built to probably play a full half of Test rugby. Angus Bell and Taniela Tupou are young. They're young props. They're athletic. Let me look up their ages here really quickly.
But saying that, I guess you want to protect two players who have had long injury layoffs and have been constantly injured like the past couple of years.
Sure, so. And that's why I don't have an issue with it in this game, because as we've said before in this podcast, the Rugby Championship doesn't matter. What Sansa has been doing shows the Rugby Championship doesn't matter, or at least they're going to start playing it less often to make it matter more, which I think is a good thing. But so I don't mind it for this game, but I think when you come down to the games that matter, which is going to be these next two, the Bledisloe test, right? I think at that point you have to roll the dice. Like, of all the games that remain this year, these are the two that matter, right? This is what realistically this whole year has been building up towards, is a Bledisloe test, right? Yeah, we got the tour later on. Who cares? That's great for experience for our players. If there are two games that we want to win this season, it's these two. That's as simple as that, Above all others, it's these two. Even more than the South African games, Argentina games, it's always the Bledisloe. It's always, those are the most important ones. I think that those are the games where you roll the dice and you keep them out there a bit longer, unless you're seriously concerned that they cannot get through that much work. Unless you're getting medical advice, they cannot get through that much work. But I think, look, Taniela Tupou's 28, Angus Bell 23, right? Bell especially, younger guy, he's got that stamina. Slipper is 35 years old, right? Alan Alatoa,
early 30s.
Where is he? He's only 30. Wow, I actually thought he was a lot older. He looks older. Poor guy. He's younger than us. Well, he's younger than me. I think he's slightly older than you because he's a January birth. But Slipper at 35 years old, like, needs to be used in the right ways. There's a role for him, but it has to be done right. There's a role for Angus Bell, and that is to be your forward enforcer and to do everything in your forward pack, basically. Like, that's what he's capable of. One thing I've taken out of this game as well, Australian rugby absolutely cannot allow Angus Bell and Taniela Tupou to go overseas. You need to keep them in Super Rugby. Have to. Whatever money you need to throw at them to get them to stay, you throw it at them. Like, Tupou's only on a 1-year deal with the Waratahs. He needs to extend. Even if he goes back to Queensland or another team, as an Australian rugby fan, he needs to stay in Super Rugby, because we can't have him becoming a victim of the fucking Ghetto law. Just keep him in Australia, right? No other signing you have is as valuable as those two front rowers. They need to stay in Super Rugby. They will make Super Rugby better for being in it. And look, I think, and I want to showcase that people could change and their opinions can change. One player I think we really missed this game was Lukan Salakai-Lotto. I started out this Rugby Championship and indeed this international period not being a huge fan of his. I think he's improved along the way, and him not being in the team showcased how good he's actually play compared to the other options at position, barring Nick Frost. Jeremy Williams had some good plays, especially some line-out steals early on, but the effort that Salakai Lotto plays with, especially in defense, showed his absence was very noticeable. Very, very noticeable. I think also the effort that Fraser McWright puts in, nothing against Tizano, but McWright, I think this game still shows that McWright has got something a bit more than what Tizano has. That was his absence was highlighted as well. But Salakai Lotto, I never thought I'd hear myself saying this. His absence was noted. I've really come around on how he's played for the Wallabies, especially in the context of this game. Yeah, look, it just sort of is what it is at the end of the day. We can't do anything about the result now. The only thing we could do is learn from it, move on, prepare for the All Blacks.
Yeah, and I saw the stat there the last time you guys got beat was what by 60 points was like 2 years
97.
or so. Yeah, 97 out from a World Cup that you went on to win. So, you know,
yeah, and we won 3 Bledisloe games that next year as well.
Next year. So as bad as it all sounds, that there's a sobering reality, and I think in the stat it was 12 of those players that played in that 97 game played in the 99 World Cup final. So, look, it's a learning experience. You know, you're not going to win every game, and some games it just happens that way. But yeah. Moving on to probably the most disappointing result of the rugby season, which is the All Blacks getting swept by the Springboks. Look, can't really come on here and complain about anything. We just weren't good enough again. It's a sobering reality for us All Blacks fans that we just failed to deliver yet again. There was moments. I'm still very excited about this team and excited about Razor. Obviously, we didn't score any tries, which is a backbone of an All Blacks team, is normally their attack. But defensively, much better this week. I thought few players definitely stuck their hands up. Cody Taylor was an absolute monster for the 33-year-old. And Wallace Atiti had probably his best game in a black jersey in South Africa, which is always hard to do. So, look, moments there that I went, we can win this game, but we obviously still lost. And there's moments there where I go, if we keep continuing this way, we will lose a Rugby World Cup this way as well, if you know what I mean. I sat there and I watched Damien McKenzie miss a kick from 30 metres out in front to put us up and put some pressure onto the Springboks. Failed to do that. I also sat there and I went, look, we need to see where we're at as well. And I just did the team averages from this last game. We're a 27-year-old team average. The Springboks are a 29-year-old team average. This is an aging Springboks team. This is some of their best players putting in their best performances at their peak time as they kind of get to their older age. So I go, where we at and where the Springboks are at are two different stages. Springboks are off the back of a World Cup win, you know, best team in the world, and I think by a good amount, where the All Blacks are still growing. I think it's a harsh reality check for the New Zealand public. Like, to those people who don't watch rugby as much as me, which is I watch a shitload of rugby, and I sat there and I went, look, we've just gone to South Africa. We've lost by 4 points and lost by 6 points to the best team in the world, where we've been up or had an opportunity to win those games. You can't be angry about that, but people in New Zealand are so thick when it comes to this sometimes. They just expect victory because it's happened before. Like, we've obviously had histories of winning, 86% win rates, rah. You know, the golden eras from 2007 to probably up to 2019, 12 years of just constantly knowing we're probably going to get victories. Freedom Cup, this is the first time I think in 15 years they've won the Freedom Cup, which is South Africa's version of the Bledisloe. So we are so used to winning that when we lose a couple of games, it's a shock. And it's like, for anyone who knows anything, like, as much as I was confident we could get a win, and we showed we could get a win, South Africa are the best team in the world at the moment for a reason. You have to
playing in South Africa as well, which can't be underestimated, the advantage of that home field. You know, look, South Africa is sort of one step ahead of you and also sort of one step behind you on their journey. You know, this All Blacks team has aged out a few players, so you're in that next step of bringing in that next generation. South Africa are sort of not quite at that step yet. They've still got a lot of their stars that are probably going to retire in the next couple of years, but they haven't retired just yet. So they're not They still bring on some young guns, but probably not the same way as New Zealand. So in that way, their team's a little bit more developed, but still haven't taken that step that New Zealand is sort of currently taking. Look, it's going to sound maybe a bit strange, but the public is the public, whether it's in New Zealand or Australia. They have expectations for their national team. And, when the Wallabies lose these games, when the Wallabies lost the game to Argentina, there were so many comments. Oh, when we won the game against Argentina last week, sorry, there's so many comments like, "Oh, we only beat Argentina by 1 point," and it's like, you clearly don't watch rugby if you think Argentina is a pushover, right? Like, this is the guys that have been in the Rugby Championship for years now, taking it to South Africa and New Zealand. They beat New Zealand in New Zealand, came in the top 4 in the Rugby World Cup. Like, this is a tier 1 rugby nation. This is a legitimate rugby championship contender. They're the only team that could possibly win the rugby championship this year, other than the Springboks. Like, that should tell you it right there. The Wallabies and the All Blacks are both 1 and 3. In this rugby championship. So that should tell you the level that Argentina is playing at. So the New Zealand public, I don't get a lot of their opinions a lot. I'm sure you get it more than I do. But this, the fact that they're complaining about losing to the Springbok, this is quite possibly the best international team of all time. You can't go in there with it. Well,
there's an argument to be made.
There's an argument to be. I think if you've got to recognise that rugby in 2024 is at a higher standard than probably has been in the past, just due to the nature of sports science and where things have come in that field. I think that you can compare that, streak of New Zealand in the 2010s up until probably about 2019, and this new South African era of 2019 to present. I think those are probably like what I would say are the top 2 eras of teams of all time, and there's arguments to be made either side, on both sides, about which one is better in there. But even if they're the second best international rugby team of all time, like this current squad, the current New Zealand squad isn't the best international rugby team of all time. It's got some generational players in there, don't get me wrong, but you also lost generational players. You've lost World Cup winners. You lost Super Rugby champion winners. You can't go in there with an expectation of victory. It's crazy, and that is like such a misconception I see so much in rugby, particularly in Australia, South Africa, and New Zealand, is that the public always expects these teams to beat all other teams, and it's always the end of the world when it's a loss. And it's such a silly attitude to have, because realistically, it's almost, you don't want your team to be losing, but you want games to be competitive. You want there to be that competition, because it means so much more when you actually win, and it means you've got a good competition. It means you've got all the teams have got areas to grow and improve, and it means all of those nations are getting better and better at rugby. So yeah, it's public perception's a funny thing. So yeah, I don't know. That's just, hearing you say that, it just makes me, I can empathize with what you're feeling in that way, because it's what we as Wallabies fans have been dealing with for years.
Yeah, it's not. We're just not used to being on the other side like you lot. So
no.
Quickly, Springbok tours obviously has been announced 2026.
Yeah.
The All Blacks is touring Springboks, which is awesome for us. Like, don't get me wrong, we'll discuss how you guys fall into line here. But I sit there and I go, this is an awesome experience. We're going to play 8 matches over in South Africa, do the whole tour. 3 are going to be obviously test matches, and then I imagine they'll have like a Springboks A game, and then the URC sides or whatever teams they're going, Curry Cup teams, whatever they've got going on there. Obviously, it made it interesting with now Rugby Championship has taken a break. As we mentioned a few podcasts ago, where is this Rugby Championship heading? There was talks of these Springboks tours. There's obviously Rugby World Cup years, Lions tours coming on. You guys actually have, with Phil Waugh, and I love the way he's responded to this, is not that it's a threat, but actually how can we get our due
opportunity?
Yeah, get our due course to make sure we get our games and get what we need out of it, but also grow what we need to do and get boxes ticked outside of South Africa and New Zealand. So give us your thoughts on these tours, my friend.
I think it's a good thing because something's being done. It's good that they've recognised that the rugby championship in its current format isn't working. Is not. You're getting good attendance at these games, and I think you're getting decent TV numbers, but it's just not what it was. And I think I like this idea of making it less frequent so that it is more meaningful. I like as well that they're always going to have the Bledisloe, which is and keeping that. And I think that was really important. I think that was equally as important to New Zealand as it was to Australia. I think Australia is going to come out of this well. I think Argentina is not. I think Argentina is really the ones getting fucked here. But Australia got lots of options on the table. I've seen that in the years where there's the Springboks All Blacks tours, it becomes a Wallabies England tour, which I love. I bloody love that. You know, either the Wallabies touring England and playing some of those teams over there and England as well. And then England coming here and doing the same against the Super Rugby teams and the Wallabies. I love that. I really love that because you've got huge English fan base here. You got Wallabies fans over in England as well. I love that. There's talks of potentially linking with Japanese rugby for something similar as well. Again, another fantastic idea and another relationship built in that regard. I'd even like to see then in the years that the rugby championship is on, that rugby championship is expanded to perhaps 6 teams, you know, Fiji and Japan coming into that mix as well. And then in the off years, other things happen, and maybe Fiji, Japan, and Argentina have things in the off year. But Argentina, I think, has really been left holding the short end of the stick here. And that, I think, is the issue with SANZAAR as a body because it's South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, right? There's not an Argentinian voice in there, at least not that I'm aware of. Maybe I'm wrong. But it seems like there's not an Argentinian voice in there because if there was, I don't see how this gets greenlit without something being in place for Argentina. Now, at least Australia was sort of aware that this was happening and had been formulating their own plans in the background. It seems like this has really caught Argentinian rugby off guard, and it's not fair and it's not good for Argentinian rugby, which means it's not good for world rugby as a whole. So something needs to be sorted for Argentinian rugby. What I do like is that South America in general is getting rugby is becoming more and more popular there. Uruguay, Chile, even Brazil, it's becoming more and more popular, which I think is fantastic. I love that. Really, really love that. But Argentina playing series against those teams is not going to help them improve in their rugby. We've seen the benefits of them playing the rugby championship against the Springboks, All Blacks, and Australia year after year after year. We've seen that increase in quality, right? So it's showing that it might not be commercially working, but for rugby development side, it's definitely been working for Argentina.
Would you say in those 2026, 2030 years, those 4 years, we could hold like a South American competition like they have in football? I know where you have Argentina playing Chile, Uruguay, some of those other nations in there, or even just in America.
I don't see why you can't, but I just don't think it benefits Argentinian rugby the way these other tours are going to benefit Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. You know, like it is going to benefit Australia to have a Bledisloe every year, and then to perhaps either have an England tour. If that happens, that's going to benefit Australian rugby because then you're consistently playing a Northern Hemisphere opponent, whereas South Africa and New Zealand may not be getting that as often. And we know when it comes to Rugby World Cup time, it's important to know what the Northern Hemisphere is doing for our Southern Hemisphere teams, and perhaps Australia can learn more there. Argentina playing against Chile, Uruguay, whoever else, it's going to benefit those lower tier teams, and maybe it'll speed along South American rugby. But I think Argentina needs something else in there as well. They need, you need to keep your blade sharp. You need something to sharpen yourself against, and not regularly playing the All Blacks, Springboks, Wallabies is going to dull their blade. They need, Japan is not the same level as those other teams, but it's at least it's a step up from Uruguay and Chile. I don't know. I feel really bad for Argentina rugby out of this.
I guess talking about that, we can talk a little bit. Let's go on to Super Rugby now, because Super Rugby discussion points. Obviously, Cheika made a couple of bold statements. I'm not saying out of line statements, but bold statements about Super Rugby and about some of the discussions even he was having when he was coach of Australian rugby about separating Australian rugby from Super Rugby. And could this be an option as well if that happens and Higuares get formatted to come and join some style of New Zealand comp? But first thoughts, there's obviously, we've discussed this pretty heavily before, Super Rugby, where it's going, what's happening. Australian rugby, the more and more discussions I'm hearing, the more and more it's looking like they want a domestic comp. How that's done, it's going to be very interesting. Like that's the idea has to be, how are you going to do this and complete this? Because there is definitely enough energy and excitement out there for club rugby in Australia. You looked at the Shoot Shield final and the noise that brought with East versus Norths. You look at Queensland Premier Rugby competition with Brothers taking out another victory. There's excitement. People love club rugby there. How you turn that into a domestic comp without, as you said before, they're making these faux teams of Queensland Country, Queensland City, where it didn't quite work in the NRC. What are your thoughts, obviously, on Cheika, Australians' next step in Super Rugby?
I think it's sort of similar to the Rugby Championship, just something different's got to be done. Maybe that's why we're seeing all these one-year contracts in Super Rugby, is because something is going to change after 2025, right? I just don't know, but something needs to change, because the current trajectory is not looking like growth. I like separation of the competition to some extent. I would like to see that there is some, interaction with New Zealand rugby, and the Dura and Moana Pasifika and all that. I'd love to see some Japanese rugby involvement, some Hagiwari's involvement. But yeah, look, maybe this is the path that we need to go down. Is that we do make it a club competition, and we, maybe it's, and I think this would be really difficult, and there's a lot of branding power that would disappear. But if the Super Rugby teams went away and it all became down to club level, I think that the ACT Brumbies would still exist, because I don't think I think that's the best possible branding for a Canberra-based team. But the Waratahs Reds went away. The Force would probably stay, but maybe there's more clubs out in Western Australia. Look, it could work. And then you've got something comparable to the NRL as well, and you've got people, more closely aligning with their teams. It's just difficult, because the Waratahs, the Reds are such established historical brands. It's like, what do you do with those? Yeah, my opinion is something has to be done. I did have a thought today, was thinking about Super Round and how that has sort of been a bit of a failure, like, if we're brutally honest. Mostly because it's been held in Melbourne, and that's just not, and it's rugby played there, but it's just not the city that I would choose to host a Super Round. I think there's a reason even the NRL has kept the Super Round up in Brisbane, because Melbourne is just flooded with AFL supporters. It's not going to get the traction you want. Thinking about Super Round, what I would love to see is almost a tour of Super Rounds around each country. So say, for example, Australia has, we've got 4 teams this year. We have 4 Super Rounds. We have one in Perth, where the all Australian teams play each other there, but you just have 2 games there. So for example, you have like the Force versus the Brumbies, Waratahs versus the Reds, or something there. You have one in Brisbane, you have one in Sydney, you have one in Canberra, and then that way, it's almost like the Sevens, where you can go there, you have a whole day of rugby or something. You can put some of the Super Rugby W there as well, or you can have some of the club games on beforehand. Like, imagine leading into a Super Round in Sydney, and you have a Shoot Shield game ahead of it. Like, that'd be great. It's a great advertisement for the Shoot Shield as well. But I think something just needs to be done. You just need to recognize that the current concept isn't working. Alternatives are needed.
Well, I believe the rumour mill around Super Round is it's going to happen in Perth, and it's going to align with the Anzac test that they're discussing.
I've heard that as well.
So the All Blacks and Wallabies members of your Super Rugby team would obviously miss out on Super Round, which again, I've got no problem with. I don't mind testing depth over that period of time. And then the weekend obviously culminates in the Anzac game. And then you've got the Super Rugby games around it. And then there's also talks of the Wallaroos versus Black Ferns playing as well. So, like, make a whole weekend of Anzac footy being Super Round, Super Rugby teams all going to play. Then you've got the All Blacks and the Wallabies. I couldn't agree more with something like that, and just a festival of Southern Hemisphere, New Zealand, Australian rugby, just to me sounds the right way to go. There's also been a few signings in Super Rugby. The Waratahs have picked up 5-6 players, I think, just not big names, but I like the way they're going about it, getting some depth. Yep, and apparently they're for every day up until September 17th or something like that, where when they fully name their squad, they're going to name either a signing or re-signing from the director of rugby there. So again, we may see some other names that we haven't seen before or interesting names come out. Moana Pasifika just named the signing of Jackson Gard and Bishop, who I played with, no biggie, but obviously former Hurricane, played his trade over in France for a little bit and Japan, came back, is now playing for the Wellington Lions, and another good signing for them off the back of obviously Adi Savia. Again, you need lots of pieces to win a few Super Rugby games, and they're going in the right direction there. And talking about the islands, we are into the heated moments of the Pacific Nations Cup. Fiji beat Tonga, so that means they're top qualifier. Japan beat USA to make sure they were top qualifiers. So next week, I believe this weekend coming up, we have the battle of the losers, which is Canada versus Tonga, the two teams in red. We'll be battling out to see who's the worst of the worst. And then the semi-finals see Fiji versus USA and Japan versus Samoa in Japan, both of those games. So exciting times. Look, again, it's looking like a Fiji versus Japan are going to come together and meet in a final. But Samoa is a dark horse in that. I don't see USA upsetting Fiji. No. But again, Fiji went down to 14 men against Tonga and still beat them pretty handedly. And they're such a good side at the moment, the Fijian side. And you go, again, you look at it and you go, this is where getting teams like this in Super Rugby has benefited Fijian rugby as much as, there is that international powerhouse, which is the Fijian players playing overseas. Having them localised now, Mick Byrne, who coached Fijian Jura for 2-3 years, is now coach of the Flying Fijians. You go, just makes a lot of sense to me if you're going to start developing those islands. I love Moana Pacific has now got Artie and stuff, that we don't have a team based out of Samoa and Tonga as well. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, the actual foundation may not be there to do it for the same as Fiji, stadiums and so on and so forth and set up. But to me, this doesn't make your argument that you could host teams in the Pacific Island nations and it works and it develops these nations. Fiji's putting their way forward and all the best to those teams going into a semi-final.
Yeah.
Last point, obviously, Hughesy, man who, put his name up in the lights for the Wallabies and then switched allegiances. Marky Mark, ripping and tearing on a rugby league field.
Absolutely no surprise. He's a great player. He was a great player. If you're a great player in union, you're obviously going to be a great player in league. I mean, it's 2 less people on the field. Like, it's great. You don't even have to ruck and maul. Like, of course he was going to. He was always going to be great. The best part about it has been watching the commentators just obsess over his last name in some blatant racism. Like, try saying his last name, Nwanga Nakatawase. It's just like far out. Like, some cultural sensitivity training would not go amiss in the NRL commentary, but it's making everything about his last name. And it's like, have you seen what he's doing on the field? Like, have you seen what he's done on the field? Like, sheesh. I mean, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, I'm not surprised either that the Roosters pulled off the ultimate heist in actually getting him to be able to play this season, which the NRL only okayed because the Roosters assured them that he would only be playing in New South Wales Cup this year. And so they were able to get him through that way. It's, classic Nick Politis backroom politicking. But I don't think anyone who's ever seen Nwanga Nakatawase play is surprised. He's a quality player. It sucks that we've lost him. And I'm happy he's succeeding. Like, there's never a doubt in my mind that he would.
Yeah, totally. And it's always good to see that this guy played for the Wallabies not too long ago, can rip and tear in league. So the arguments they seem to make in league, again, that happens quite a lot. That the Kangaroos would beat the Wallabies by 80 points. This lessens that argument a little bit more. Like, hey, if you get a Wallaby to come across, there's a good chance they will still be a very good rugby league player. Seeing it there with Marky Mark. Look, we're in dire need. It's not often that I say I will throw my support around a lost Pumas team, but we are 2 weeks away from, obviously, the Bledisloe, which we will discuss slightly after this. But what I need now is I need every lost Pumas fan to come out. And I'm not even calling for 2. They can win the Rugby Championships at Springboks. I just can't see them go undefeated. Can't see that happen. I can't live with myself if that happens. So please, Lost Pumas, do what Hughesy's team couldn't do. Do the unthinkable, beat the best team in the world, and make me happy for one day. But yeah, we do obviously have the Bledisloe coming up, and so from next week, obviously we've got a week off this week. Teams travel back. Me and Hughesy will only be talking on this podcast, and other than that, it will be slander towards each other because we are no longer friends. We are now mortal enemies.
Oh,
and
yeah.
as much as we've supported each other throughout these tough times, you guys getting beaten by 60 points, us getting swept by the Springboks, I hope that Angus Bell gets rested for the Bledisloe. That's all I hope for. I don't want him to get injured, obviously, because I would never wish that upon Belly, but I just hope that Smith goes, actually, Bell, you've done enough. Just take a day off. Take a couple of days off, specifically 2 Saturdays over the next 3 weeks, and I'll be a happy man.
I hope that the entire All Blacks team gets a case of light food poisoning and can't play in the Bledisloe. You know, just something that they get over in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. You know?
You're gonna do the old, what was it, the Maid and Springboks in 1995, where the assistant or whatever it was came in and poisoned us and on the South African Saffers World Cup. Interesting that happened. So you're going to try and do that to steal the Bledisloe office. I get it.
Yep.
Look, what we do have coming out, which may or may not involve food poisoning, is our steak off, which will be coming out next Sunday. We did our first challenge in the Rugby Booth Bledisloe Challenge, which obviously happened last year. I won because All Blacks don't lose Bledisloes, as everyone knows. And this is the second year running of it, and we started off with a steak off, which Hughesy's element, but we may see a surprise or two, or a couple of bit of food poisoning. So stay tuned for that on Sunday when that comes out. Other than that, that's us done for today. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back same time, same place next week to lead into the Bledisloe Cup of all Bledisloe's Cups. 2 new coaches. Teams do battle. Thank you for joining us. See you later. Goodbye.
Peace.